I think Canadians understand that judicial processes, police investigations, and court proceedings are all entirely independent of the government of the day and of certainly of the Prime Minister's office. That is the way it should be. The processes in this case have unfolded in a proper manner, completely independent of government, as they should have.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, as you heard there, continues to face questions about the Mark Norman affair 2 days after the Crown abandoned its breach of trust case against the Vice-Admiral. Today, Trudeau would not respond to the opposition's calls for an inquiry. Norman was accused of leaking cabinet secrets to the company that won a $668 million shipbuilding contract. The deal was signed by the Conservative government, but then temporarily put on ice when the Liberals were elected. CBC News has learned a number of former ministers in the Harper government talked to Norman's defense team.
Remember, Scott Bryson interfered by delaying the contract. What discussions took place around that? Because until a contract is cancelled and the government, a new government, changes the orders of the previous government, Mark Norman had his orders. Right? So the information, I think, that is key, which perhaps the DPP should release or the PMO should agree to release. What discussions did they have when they decided to stop the delay and fulfill the contract? Clearly, they were embarrassed by the leak. Mark Norman then became the way they sort of explained away the embarrassment.
So what information was handed over by the former cabinet ministers? Former Conservative Justice Minister and Minister of Defence, Peter MacKay, joins us from Toronto. Hi, Mr. MacKay. Great to see you again. Thanks for your time.
Nice to see you too, Vashi. Thank you.
So we know, thanks to my colleague Murray's reporting, that you talked to Mark Norman's defence team. What did you tell them that you believe may have contributed to charges being stayed or the charge being stayed?
Well, I don't know that anything I said resulted in the outcome yesterday. But what we discussed, as you would expect, is the process of procurement generally, the culture of leaks in the capital and from various government departments, including National Defence. And we talked about my experience in working with Mark Norman and that I found him to be highly professional, reputable, a man of integrity, and somebody who was first and foremost motivated to do the right thing for the Royal Canadian Navy, the Canadian Forces, and his country. A very patriotic man, a very honourable man in my view.
Can you help us understand what the nature of your interactions with Mr. Norman were like when you were in cabinet? So what, I know you're talking obviously about your impressions of him as a person based on that working relationship, but what was involved in the relationship?
Well, Mark, firstly, as head of the Navy, was very involved in the early stages of laying out what the long-term requirements would be to replace surface combatants, the Arctic offshore patrol vessels. He was a very hands-on, very knowledgeable person when it came to the Navy. He was, of course, very involved and integral in Canada's effort in Afghanistan. His role as Vice CDS near the end of our time in government was also critically important. I relied heavily on him for advice on occasion, across a number of other procurements as well. So Mark, with his 37 years in serving Canada, had accumulated a tremendous working knowledge and had garnered respect not only in Canada but around the world, and is somebody who I have the utmost respect for, both personally and professionally.
Can you tell us a bit about the interactions with his defense team? Was it an interview? What kind of discussion emerged? And you had also said that there was a brief conversation with the RCMP. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I received a call from the RCMP, this is some time ago, simply in regard to one single email, an offline exchange that I had with Mark Norman that was very quiet, and it had to do with an issue around procurement. And the discussion with his team, Marie Hennon and Christine Mainville, came to my office here in Toronto. They requested to come and see me, and we spoke for roughly 2 hours about what I mentioned previously, procurement, leaks, the operations of government, how procurement proceeds through various committees, cabinet committees, and various departments' input. And then I spoke about Mark and the working relationship I had with him.
Do you think there was any, I know that you can only be so forthcoming, but any evidence, like if the RCMP contacted you and on this very brief issue, was there ever a point that you thought, hey, here's all this stuff I know that could help Mr. Norman's case or that might be germane to the case one way or the other? here you go, I'm presenting it to you now.
Well, Vashi, what I found surprising was that I first learned through the media that I was going to be a Crown witness in the case. And this was subsequent to the very brief conversation, a phone call I had from the RCMP on that narrow issue of the email. And so I certainly wasn't pursuing them and offering myself as a Crown witness. I would have appeared, of course, if requested. But it seems in retrospect that there were a number of people that the RCMP I would have expected to have interviewed in more detail about the case, given that in the indictment, the single count indictment of breach of trust, it covers a period of time in which the Conservative government, so ministers like myself, Minister Kenny and others, could have and would have had relevant information that was not requested. And so that is a question of operations and investigative techniques that the RCMP will have to answer for.
Yeah, and believe me, we put the question out there many times this week. Certainly it's a question for the RCMP and perhaps to a different degree the government as well, or the prosecution service at some point. But with respect to those ministers, if there was relevant information, is there any responsibility borne by you or others to have presented that earlier, made sure the RCMP had it?
Well, no, because a person is presumed to be innocent, and in any event, I was not sure what the RCMP were looking for or what information they sought, nor was I requested to give anything other than a response on this very narrow question. But keep in mind, Vashi, that the defense team, led by Marie Hennon, were being very proactive in this regard. And while it's not unheard of, it is unusual for the defense to be providing the exculpatory evidence to the Crown. In this case, they clearly provided evidence, I think, as recently as March, that the Crown then took into consideration and ultimately came to the decision to stay the charge. And if it was available to the defense team, I would suspect that with a little probing, the RCMP and the Crown itself could have found this information as well.
Based on what you know about the period in question, about what you know about Vice-Admiral Mark Norman, when you heard the Crown say that information came to light and it meant that we didn't have a reasonable chance of conviction, what kind of information do you think that will be? Or that
it would be pure speculation. I mean, one thought is that this element of there being no reasonable prospect of conviction goes back to the very origins. And keep in mind that the case began when the Privy Council Office, the bureaucratic arm of the Prime Minister's office, called in the police to investigate the leak and may have provided information at that time. The element of proving the case requires, in legal terms, that mens rea exists, that the operating mind, in this case Mark Norman, had to be to accomplish some outcome here that would have benefited him and would have been against the public interest. Well, there was no benefit to Mark Norman ever to have leaked information. All Mark Norman wanted to do was see that Canada, in fact, be protected, that we have supply ships capable of refueling our Navy. And I think it's important to note here that this was a very successful, arguably the most successful procurement that we've had in the last probably 50 years. The ship came in on time and on budget. Unheard of in procurement. And so not only was there a complete vindication of Mark Norman and a finding that there was no criminality, no culpability, but he was also proven to be absolutely right in wanting this ship procurement for the refueling ship to go forward. He was absolutely in his lane in doing that and providing information to the government and, in fact, following the wishes of the government that had cabin authority.
Should he be reinstated?
Absolutely. He should be reinstated. He should be compensated for his legal fees for the 2 years that he missed of service. So he should be now approaching 40 years in uniform. And in my opinion, and this is my opinion only, but it may be shared by others, Mark Norman should be the next chief of the defense staff. And I suspect that won't happen under this current government because he was targeted and treated so badly and a lot of malice and venal efforts to stymie and stifle him and his career and his reputation. But Mark Norman is a stellar person, a hero in this country, and somebody who should be rewarded handsomely for all that he has gone through and endured, and his family as well.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. MacKay. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Vashi.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.